Hi, it's May 13th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, let's briefly talk about the NBA. We're just going to rant a little bit here, a couple of items. NBA first. You know, folks, one of the reasons why you want to bet futures rather than the game to game is because not only are you getting better odds, right? And of course, opportunities to hedge, insurance, but things happen. So let's just look at this NBA playoff season right now. Let's just talk about spectacular players, high impact players, players who you understand have nicknames like Playoff Jimmy, right? Players who have represented the United States in the Olympic Games. Um, Steph Curry, his injury has had a material effect on the Golden State Minnesota T Wolves series, right? Understand, it looks like the T Wolves are going to win that. Um, you actually had an opportunity after Curry's injury to get the T Wolves at better than double digits, not to win the series, to win it all. But the point is, you recognized that the T Wolves actually have a good record head to head against Denver. They have a 500 record against the OKC Thunder. Um, them getting by Golden State was a likelihood because Golden State has had to play guys who aren't getting a lot of minutes otherwise without the Steph Curry injury. And of course, Curry's not the only injury. Let's remember Jimmy Butler had a hurt pelvis. He had a dramatic fall. The Warriors, quite frankly, are lucky that Butler is able to play. Right? It's only because Butler is a gamer that he's on the court. Well, these Golden State injuries aren't, the only major injuries. Now we have, in my opinion, perhaps the best team in basketball losing one of its linchpins, Jason Tatum. Right? And I'm just telling you, some of the worst injuries are these non contact injuries. You see a guy who's having a great game, which Tatum was having, and suddenly Tatum crumples to the floor. Right, folks? You're having a great game. You don't want to leave the court. The guy crumbles to the floor because he can't stand up anymore. Right? Sooner or later, your body takes over. Right? So now Jason Tatum is out. Of course, it looks like the Knicks, who are not on par with the Celtics. Understand, some of these Knicks wins, they've been down by 20 points. Right? There is a group that's stopping the Celtics. It's the Celtics. Right? They've been going cold at the weirdest times in the series. But now, you have Jason Tatum out. Now, here again, I don't believe the Knicks win it all, and I'm a Knicks fan. Right? But if you had money on the Knicks, you got spectacular odds because no one thought the Knicks would actually get by Boston. Right? You got spectacular odds, and now you're in the catbird seat. You're up 3-1. Tatum's one of the most dominant players in the league. Folks, look at the first team All NBAs on his resume. Right? And let's face it, you lose to Tatum, I'm sure everyone in the Celtic organization is saying, hey, we'll handle it. We'll bounce back. Folks, they're down 3-1. Right? Can the Celtics without Tatum win 3 in a row? I think the answer is no. Let's talk about another injury. Porzingis. Right? We're hearing that he was ill before. Let's face it, Porzingis isn't playing Porzingis ball. Right, folks? That's 4 key injuries involving teams that you thought had an outside shot. Right? So understand, gambling insiders will say, oh, forget about futures. What's that about? Only one team is going to win the NBA championship. We all know that. But understand, futures give you the opportunity to bet more on a special team if you have a cheap future on whoever they're playing. Right? So take a look at it. Just understand, in life, things happen, right? Cleveland has a bunch of guys out. In life, things happen. You'll be surprised how, something looks impossible, right? Who would have thought a few days ago that the Knicks would beat the Celtics or would be up 3-1? Right? But sometimes, as Woody Allen used to say, something like 10% of life is just showing up. Right? You look at these teams, you say to yourself, wow, LeBron has a negative plus minus on the season. JJ Redick, his former podcasting buddy, who's now a first-year head coach, has never been a head coach in the playoffs. Wow, Luka is just figuring out his way around LA. Right? What could possibly go wrong with them playing the Timberwolves, right, who don't have that many more losses than them? Right? Understand, I know, for some fans, they look and they see LeBron, they see Luka, right? They see the brand, the Lakers, right? We've all been alive when the Lakers have won an NBA championship. Right? And we think, oh, who could possibly bet against the Lakers? You and I know that's not the way life works. Stuff happens. Right? In that Lakers series, I'm convinced Rudy Gobert is, under the basket trying to get a rebound. Then he's looking around and he's thinking, wow, the Lakers don't have any bigs to compete with me for this rebound. Right? Here he is. He's under the basket. He's looking around. He's thinking, man, where's AD at? Then he's like, oh, wait a moment. AD's no longer here. Right? So bettors need to be fluid. Let's switch to boxing. Now, folks, boxing is rock, paper, scissors. Right? You, the gambler, need to recognize that. It's rock, paper, scissors. The fact that A beats B and that B beats C doesn't mean that C can't beat A. It doesn't mean that A beats C. Right? The great economist, I'll give him a plug here, personal favorite, Thomas Sowell, also has made a profound point. Right? He says, look, sometimes on some days, some people are better than they usually are. Right? Sometimes on some days, some people are, with their A game for whatever reason. And so makes it personal and says, some days I'm not the man I am on other days. Right, folks? There's variance. Right? You know that if you're a Boston Celtic fan watching the Celtics in the second halves of some of these Knicks games. Right? You can be, a real informed fan. You could be a fan who's watched every Celtic game this season. And you're looking at them in some of these games and you don't recognize the team and it's your team. Right? There are games where you're looking at Anthony Edwards of the Timberwolves and you're like, man, who can stop this dude? Right? He famously said he didn't want to be the face of the NBA. Charles Barkley responded by saying he's going to have to get used to it if he has this game. But then you look at Anthony Edwards on other games. By the way, this is the difference between an Anthony Edwards and a Jordan. right? You look at Edwards on other days and you're like, well, is this guy even an all-star? You're like, man, if you were new to the sport, you'd be looking at the Timberwolves, you would hear about Anthony Edwards, then you'd have to, a quarter in, tap your friend and say, hey, which one's Anthony Edwards? Because he doesn't stand out. Right, so I'll just say it this way. Sports has a lot of volatility. Right, when they're giving you ridiculous odds on some team, and you're looking at the team and you're thinking to yourself, man, this team looks good to me. You're looking at the stats. You're thinking to yourself, wow, this team is one of the better teams in the league defensively. You're looking at the bench, and you're noticing there are guys on the bench like Naz Reid, former sixth man of the year, right? And you're saying, man, Naz Reid, why isn't he starting? Right? You realize this guy's coming off the bench and this guy has game. And, importantly, this guy can take a lot of minutes. In other words, the starters get to save themselves. Then you have Mike Conley, and you realize, wow, you got that vet who is not going to turn the ball over, is going to hit the free throws, and at least some games in the series can play a lot of minutes. And if they're giving you outsized odds, and then you hear the kicker, Steph Curry's out of the game, and you just saw Jimmy Butler fall, and Jimmy's out there, and you notice that when he doesn't have the ball, he looks gimpy. The minute a casino says to you, hey, we're offering you better than 10-1, your line should be, wrap it up. Wrap it up. I'll take it. I'll take my chances. Well, let's talk boxing, right? Let me shift back to boxing. I thought Efe Ajagba beat Martin Bakole, right? One of the first rules of boxing, and I mean this, is go by your eyes, right? There's the official judgment where they say, oh, this fight's a draw, right? Then you got to think to yourself, is that what I saw? Right? Let me also throw out a rule here. I believe the more popular boxer, the guy who perhaps has generated more box office in the past, bigger purses in the past, if it's a 10-round fight, and that fighter, the box office guy, wins 4 of the 10 rounds, while in a perfect world, he should lose the fight, right? The Dwyer rule of judging is that some judge is going to give him either the decision on their card or 5 rounds. Right? I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm just saying that's the world we live in. I'm just saying if you've watched a bunch of fights and you're thinking, man, how did they call that fight a draw? Right? You're thinking to yourself, man, that fight was a draw. Then you're looking at the judges' scorecards and you're like, man, that CompuBox doesn't sync with this. Or, wow, a round's 3 minutes long. I didn't see a knockdown. One guy dominated for 2.5 minutes. The other guy had a couple of flurries, but gee, there's the rest of the round, and I'm supposed to be calling the round. I'm just telling you, box office guys get breaks. That's just the way it is. Popular guys get breaks. Right? The key is for the box office guy, the popular guy, to make it close enough where the boxing establishment can then click it into a draw or a win. Now, Ajagba won the fight to me against Martin Bakole. Right? Bakole is the more interesting character. Right? He's the guy who talks smack. He's the guy who wins fights in dramatic fashion. Right? Comes to the United States, is fighting an unbeaten Jared Anderson. He's not going to rely on the judges. Right? Bakole is the guy who lets you hit him. He's prepared to trade. He's the transactional guy. Right? You're going to hit me in the body? Okay. I'll let you do it as long as you don't hit me in the head. And what that does for him is it allows him to be more aggressive. Now let's think through how Ajagba beat him. Ajagba beat him by having lateral movement, by throwing very well timed left jabs to the body, straight rights up top, right? By leaning away from him, by staying off the ropes, keeping the fight in large part in the middle of the ring, right? We'll call what Ajagba did flow, right? This is the part of the game, by the way, that Ryan Garcia is weak at. Right? Ajagba comes out if it's a boxing match for the round. Right? If this round is all about boxing, Ajagba was outboxing Bakole round after round. Right? Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the heavyweight champion, who's about to fight Daniel Dubois. With all due respect to Daniel Dubois, who has a belt, who earned that belt. Right? Let's be real here. When you earn that belt because an undisputed champion in the division had to give up a belt so he could fight a rematch against a future Hall of Famer for the title, right? The other belts. You and I know there's really only one heavyweight champion right now. It's Alexander Usyk, right? The guy who's unbeaten, who has beaten the other title holder already, in addition to beating AJ twice, in addition to beating Tyson Fury twice, right? He's the champ. I understand, Daniel Dubois has a share of the title, right? This is a matchup involving two fighters where the end of the first fight was Dubois getting stopped, right? Didn't get ripped off by the judges. May have gotten ripped off, not deliberately, by the referee. But Usyk's really the standard bearer right now in the heavyweight division. Well, let's ask a question. Styles make fights, right? Does Ajagba have enough flow, enough boxing ability, enough movement, enough slickness to beat Alexander Usyk, who has a lot of flow and is a southpaw? Right? Certainly moves a lot better than Martin Bakole. Right? I would argue he doesn't. Now, don't get me wrong. Ajagba is one of the hardest punchers in the heavyweight division. He certainly could knock out anyone. But, as we saw in the Guido Vianello fight, Vianello has a lot of flow. Right? Ajagba has a problem with slick boxers. Usyk is an extremely slick boxer. You could see a situation where Usyk outboxes Ajagba, right? Ajagba would have a puncher's chance, but not much else, right? He moves a lot better than Bakole, but it's all comparative. He doesn't move better than Usyk. Understand, too, we saw Ajagba against Frank Sanchez, who moves extremely well, right? I would say best legs in the heavyweight division before the knee injury. We'll find out a lot about Frank Sanchez in his next fight. But understand, in that fight, not only did Sanchez outbox Ajagba, Sanchez dropped Ajagba. So understand, on my scorecard, Ajagba beat Bakole. But if I'm handicapping who has a better chance against Usyk, the answer would be Bakole. Right? Because Bakole would be aggressive. The fact that he's making compromises, the fact that he'll say, okay, I'll let this guy land this punch because that punch doesn't have the sting to hurt me. But I'm not going to let him land other shots. Right? The fact that Bakole is also a big man and was able to bum rush Ajagba some rounds, get him over by the ropes. Right? The fact that Bakole has sparred with Usyk and claims that he can rough up Usyk. The fact that Derek Chisora was able to bum rush Usyk. Right? And there have been moments. The second AJ fight, where AJ was able to get Usyk up by the ropes. Right? The fact that Usyk has been backed up before and would be outweighed likely by 50 or more pounds in a fight against Bakole tells me that Bakole would have a shot on Usyk, even though on my scorecard, and I know officially it was a draw, on my scorecard he got beaten by Ajagba. Right? I believe that's the way to look at boxing, where you're looking at the styles. You know, Lamont Roach, I thought, beat Gervonta Davis. But you understand that Davis has a big punch. Davis has already stopped a reigning 147-pound champion in Mario Barrios, who Manny Pacquiao was coming out of retirement to fight. Right? You understand that Roach grew up with Davis, had been in the ring before with Davis. This is the guy who knew Davis. Many people are going to get in the ring and they're going to be uncertain as to how to fight a guy who's shorter, whose nickname is Tank because he hits like a tank, and who's a southpaw, and who's a pretty savvy fighter. Right? Look at Davis ducking under Ryan Garcia left hooks. Right? Understand too, Davis against the taller Garcia wins that fight off a body shot. Right? Davis understood, hey, I don't want to be reaching for this tall guy. Right? Let me set this up where I hit him in the body and chop down the tree. Right? So while Roach, at least on my scorecard, beat Davis, right, I would think that Davis would have the better shot against, guys at 140 or 147 than Roach. Right? So let me say this. Martin Bakole continues to be, this is for me personally, after getting stopped by Joe Parker, who clearly deserves a shot at the title, right? And after losing on my scorecard to Ajagba, he continues to be one of the most dangerous men in the heavyweight division, right? In part because he doesn't waste a lot of energy, in part because he's carrying extra weight. I know this is counterintuitive. We look at him and we say, oh, if this guy lost some weight, he might be faster. Right? But understand, if you're making deals where you look open to the body, it's a little bit of an illusion. A young guy, Jared Anderson, who is a better athlete than Martin Bakole, takes the bait and starts leaning over the pocket to hit you in the body. And that allows you to hit him in the head and to hit him with uppercuts. Right? Things like that give Bakole a competitive advantage. And if you've been in the ring before with Usyk, and you know that Usyk, while he can be surgical, right? He did stop Dubois. He stopped Tony Bellew. That's an important fight to look at, right? Usyk can punch. But you understand Usyk's not a Zhili Zhang level puncher, right? Quite frankly, he's not an Efe Ajagba level puncher. And Bakole, who we look at and we say, oh, he should lose some weight, just went 10 rounds against Efe Ajagba, right? So keep an eye on Martin Bakole. I'm now hearing that Frank Warren wants Moses Itauma to fight Martin Bakole. Be careful what you wish for, right? Let me say this too. There are going to be some people who see this Efe Ajagba Martin Bakole fight and who see Ajagba landing straight right hands, and he is landing straight right hands. But I need for people to think about the height and the angles, right? Bakole at times is coming in a little bit low, and Ajagba is throwing the punch from above Bakole, right? They're listed at as close to the same height, but I suspect that Ajagba is really as tall as he says he is. Bakole, there might be a little embellishment there on his side, right? But understand, because Ajagba is able to land his straight rights from up top, doesn't mean that a fighter who's much shorter is going to be able to land the same punch. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.